Great to see everybody. Bob Van Bargen, we've been going back and forth. Good to see you. Good to see you. I think Ida May's with us. Hi, Ida May. And Nars Khaliva from California. Thank you all for joining us this evening on this Independence Day Eve. This is our BBC Happy Hour. And this is a program that we do every Monday night with the Veterans Breakfast Club at 7 p.m. Eastern. We have a special program tonight, and it's special to me. I'm learning so much just in the green room in the conversation before we started. We're having stories from people who served in Vietnam, served in war, but were not members of the military. They were civilian volunteers working for non-governmental agencies. And they served in the 1960s in Vietnam, and they have stories to tell. We also have Jill Hunting here, a wonderful writer who wrote a beautiful book about her brother, who is one of these civilian volunteers in Vietnam, working for the IVSrs and the International Voluntary Services organization, and was killed in Vietnam in November 1965. And she wrote a beautiful book about her brother and about his loss and about her attempt to kind of discover a bit about his short life and his death in Vietnam. So this is going to be a really neat program, and it is and different slightly because we're listening to veterans' voices. They're not military veterans, but they are war veterans, and I think we want to talk about that and the distinction. But before we get started with that, I want to introduce myself. My name is Todd DiPastino. I'm the director of the Veterans Breakfast Club. We are a nonprofit that began in 2008 in Western Pennsylvania in the Pittsburgh region, where we had events open to the public, where we have veterans come and share their stories. We continue to do that here in person in Western PA mostly, and also online every Monday night at 7 p.m. Eastern with our VBC Happy Hour, which is where we are now. And my collaborator, partner in crime here is Sean Hall. He's our director of programming. Hello, Sean. How are you tonight?
I'm great. How's everybody doing this evening?
I am doing well. It is July 3rd, and it is my 30th wedding anniversary.
Well, congratulations.
Yay, congrats.
Thank you. Are you wondering why I'm here and not with my wife?
That was my first thought.
Yeah, I'm sure it was your first thought. We just got back from a week together, traveling, just the two of us. You know, our kids are grown and out of the house, so it was just the two of us. Traveling a week on the Maine coast, beautiful time, a lot of quality time together. And she requested for an anniversary present if I could just go up to my attic, which is where I am now, and like leave her alone in peace and quiet for a while. So that's what I'm doing. That's how you last 30 years with that kind of honesty. So that is how I'm spending my 30th anniversary. And to be honest, I couldn't be happier to be back with you all, because I really missed all of you last week. I wasn't around. Before we get started with the program, I do want to let people know that we have a sponsor that we're very grateful for that has been sponsoring us for quite a bit, and that is tobacco-free Adagio Health. Adagio Health is a nonprofit that provides health, wellness, and nutrition services, mostly in Pennsylvania and in West Virginia. And they have a wing, the tobacco-free program within Adagio Health, that addresses the hazards of tobacco use and vaping. And they want to educate the public about those hazards. They want to help people quit. And they have a wonderful quit program, quit line, 1-800-QUIT-NOW, 1-800-QUIT-NOW. They counsel people who want to quit smoking. And they lobby for healthier places to live, work, and play. And, you know, they support the Veterans Breakfast Club because they have found out through surveys that veterans have a higher proportion of tobacco users than non-veterans. It's often a habit that's picked up in the military, and they want to be here for when people get out of the military and want to quit. So that is one of the reasons why they support the Veterans Breakfast Club, and we are very grateful for their continued support of our VBC Happy Hour. I want to also let people know who are in the Pittsburgh area that we have some good in-person events coming up. We also, again, we do this every Monday night, our VBC Happy Hour online on Zoom, always something new, always a new story, always a new guest. Next week we have, I'll get back to the scuttlebutt, but next week we have Colonel Edwin Cottrell on. He's a remarkable. I actually think he's 102 years old. I could be wrong, because he just went to his 80th college reunion.
Oh.
He was the only one to show up.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, it was a multi-year reunion, of course, but I mean, he was the oldest person to come to Slippery Rock University for his reunion. I just love that story. He's a remarkable gentleman, a fascinating person. He was a P-47 Thunderbolt pilot in World War II, who has a phenomenal story and shares it beautifully. And we're so privileged that he's going to be joining us next week to be on the program to share his story. Sean Hall, who's with us here, is also the host of a podcast that we have, The Scuttlebutt. And Sean, would you mind telling people just briefly why we have, we do this live program every week, VBC Happy Hour. We often have special programs. Why do we also have a podcast that you work so hard on, lining up guests, recording, releasing, and promoting?
Because we like to do a lot at VBC, and actually, it really, the Scuttlebutt is I think its mission is understanding military culture from a civilian perspective. I get to touch on a lot of different things that we don't usually touch on here on the VBC Happy Hour, so it's an exciting way for us to sort of, I'd say, open up the Rolodex even more and find more veterans to find more stories about. As you saw on the screen just a moment ago, I had Ahmad Burse on. He was an Army veteran. He's now into consulting, and he consults with the Army Corps of Engineers. Found out through his service that he liked communications. And as he came out of the service, realized that he could help Army Corps of Engineers, the servicemen and women there, seek employment after they serve. He's an incredible guy. I had a wonderful conversation with him, and that's part of the reason that I love the Scuttlebutt is I get to meet so many interesting people, and I get to hear so many interesting stories, and I get to spend quality time with them. It's just them and myself usually. Sometimes I have a co-host. And we usually record for about an hour. We do a little bit of post editing, and I get to release it as a pre-recorded program. And it's awesome because you can listen to this as a podcast. If you're driving into work, you can download it on your phone and just listen to it, or you can go on YouTube and you can watch it there. And we get to cover just so many different fun topics. Next week, we have on the owner of Vault Coffee House. I had a great time with him. Don Nemchek connected me with him, Milo Speranzo. We talked coffee. We talked veteran business owners. We just really dive into everything a part of the Scuttlebutt. It's something that is a passion project of mine. And I just hope that everybody can sit down and listen to an episode. We're well over 100 episodes now. You don't need to watch from the first one. You can definitely check out the most recent, dive back in, see if there's anything that sort of piques your interest that you want to listen to. So yeah, you could get the podcast anywhere you listen to your podcast, and you could also watch it on YouTube or our website. Sean will put the link to it here in the chat. And thank you very much, Raymond Voith. We have lots of fact checkers, sharp-eyed members of the Veterans Breakfast Club. Raymond just said you had the wrong date for next week, and he's right. It shouldn't be June 10th. This is July 10th next week. So, that's a correction. It'll be July 10th, our next VBC Happy Hour. Edwin Cottrell. I also want to let people know that we have a in-person event coming up on Tuesday, July 18th. And we're calling it Burgers and Beer, Burgers and Brew at the Grist House Brewery, one of the premier craft breweries here in Pittsburgh. We used to do evening events quite often. We haven't done one since 2019, since pre-pandemic. We decided we're getting together. We're going to do this event. It'll be much like the breakfast that we have, but it'll be in the evening. Hopefully we'll get a younger crowd there, and it'll be outside. We have the whole wonderful, if you've never been to the Grist House, it's a wonderful place to have a beer and enjoy the evening outdoors. This will be an outdoors event. Please do join us if you can. Sean, if you could put the link to this event here, because we do want people to register. It's $20 a person. You get a smash burger and a beer for that $20, and you get a wonderful program. I'm hoping that we'll live stream this program also from the Grist House. I'll be working with the Grist House on seeing how we can make that happen. Finally, I want to mention that we have coming up an important anniversary. It'll be the 70th anniversary of the Korean Armistice Agreement,
which was signed on July 27th, 1953 at 10 a.m. That brought the Korean War to a close, but it really just brought the shooting war to a close. So there was no peace treaty signed. The war continued. It was simply a ceasefire. And so what we'd like to do on this date is to recognize not only those who served during the Korean War, 1950 to 1953, but have an event for all those who served in Korea, defenders of South Korea, who have served, on the Korean Peninsula since 1950. So we're going to do a in-person and streamed event, both locally here in Pittsburgh at the Heinz History Center. We'll be giving everybody who served in Korea one of these lapel pins, Defenders of Korea lapel pins, and we'll be having a special program, and we'll be announcing more of that down the road. So those are the things we have coming up. As always, I want to let people know that we send out a VBC bulletin every Monday morning, an email with our schedule and other information about who we are and what we do. And if you'd like to receive that email, just let me know. You could just let me know here in the chat. You could send me an email, todd@veteransbreakfastclub.org. But let's jump into our story tonight, our theme tonight, which I find so interesting. 416 American civilians volunteered for the International Voluntary Services, which is a non-governmental organization that helped that sent these volunteers over to Vietnam to help the people of Vietnam, develop their economy, build bridges, literally, dredge rivers, help with agriculture, help with education and health, delivering healthcare services. 416 of these brave young men and women went over to Vietnam. 3 of them, I believe, were killed in Vietnam. A few more were taken prisoner there. And we're lucky enough to have some of the people who served with IVS with us tonight. Dick Berliner, Jan Stephen Kavanaugh is with us. I see Chuck Cable is with us. He's a veteran of IVS. We have William Soriles with us. And I think we have a few others. I'll have to look in the chat to see who else, in addition to Joe Hunting. But let me ask, can I just throw it out to you, Jan Stephen and Dick, anyone, and Chuck, anybody who wants to answer it? Could you tell us a little bit about what the IVS was?
Well, I can jump in. I think I would say, Sean, your description in the what I saw online before I came on really did a good job sort of capturing the underlying values of the IVS in terms of its attachment to the Quaker tradition. And then that was kind of the underlying value systems that attracted me to it in terms of how to work with people. And so, that's kind of the headline that kind of introduced IVS as kind of this organization grounded in these values that just very much appealed to me.
So this was an organization that was created, a nonprofit, a non-governmental organization created in the 1950s, I think the early 1950s, during the Cold War.
That's right.
It came out of the peace churches, correct? The Quakers, Society of Friends, the Mennonite churches, Church of the Brethren. They were the peace churches were the force behind the IVS?
Yes, the model was very much carried forward in the Peace Corps, but it came out of the frustration with the state of the world after World War II that there was so much need and so few ways for Americans, particularly, to get involved. But eventually, not only Americans, IVS included a number of non-Americans as volunteers. We had people from Japan and the Philippines and India, England, elsewhere. But I think IVS originally appealed to me because it sent people out like the Peace Corps to remote areas where it might be a half day's walk to a telephone or a post office. I ended up in Saigon. I did not have that experience, but what I thought it would have. And Vietnam was a much more sophisticated country than I had been led to believe, because you have the Peace Corps image of we Americans with no skills were able to provide skills. Fortunately, early on, IVS did recruit primarily agricultural specialists, and they brought real skills to the table.
Chuck Cable, do you have anything to add to our kind of brief overview of what the International Voluntary Services was? Oh, we can't hear you.
He's muted.
Oh, asked to unmute. Hold on. There we go.
Yes, it was started by the three historic peace churches. The Lutheran Social Services also was one of the organizations that came on board at the board level very early on, and remained with that board of directors for a long time. I was recruited out of Laverne College, and I had several classmates from both Laverne and Manchester in Indiana. We were all recruited in 1966 by Willie Myers, who's in the group here today. But that was a model that was used for a number of years. It was to get college seniors recruited into either the Peace Corps or IVS. In this case, it was for IVS. And then the organization continued. But you also have Larry Lawrence, who was in IVS back in the late 50s, and others that are in the group here today that could give you some more of that background.
And thank you, Dick Berliner, also for reminding me. I found this fascinating, having never heard of the IVS before I started preparing for this program, that the IVS served as the model for the Peace Corps.
Yes.
The IVS predated the Peace Corps, and Peace Corps was kind of structured on the IVS, the successful IVS model.
Yeah, there were some other volunteer programs. I think United Methodist Church had a similar program, but IVS was brought to Congress at the time that the Peace Corps was created and looked at as a model.
Let's begin, Jan Stephen, let's begin with your story. You're originally from rural Ontario. You from a large Roman Catholic family, not a peace church. You're very devout and had a calling at a young age to join the priesthood. And you made an interesting choice. You went to Illinois. Was there a Maryknoll Seminary in Illinois?
That's correct. Maryknoll's college seminary was at Glen Ellen, just outside of Chicago in Illinois.
All right. So I'm Roman Catholic. I went to Boston College, a Jesuit university. So I know enough about the Maryknoll to know that they're a little, let's see.
It's okay to say it.
Yeah. Well, let's put it this way. They're the Marines of the Catholic Church. Is that fair to say?
It's fair to say, yes.
They're adventurous. So you specifically sought to, what that tells me, Jan Stephen, is that you were an adventurer. You were somebody who not only had a calling, certainly, but you also had a calling to adventure, to kind of, to embrace the world, see the world, and leave the kind of the isolated farm community that you were from.
And keep in mind that if, as I tell in my story, is I actually applied for the Military College of Canada as West Point. So so there is a way that it's important people to understand that was also, like many Catholic young men working your way up to church or army kind of thing. I had sort of both those on the table, and I was turned down from that college. I was offered the warrant officer training, and since Maryknoll offered me the top notch, I decided to go with Maryknoll. So I say that in part to the veterans listening. I'm not what you'd call a peacenik, although I'm certainly want to imagine a time when we can get beyond war. But I have a tremendous sympathy for veterans, and have again, I'm a psychologist and worked for the VA for a number of years working with veterans, kind of thing. So, but
you're a peace warrior, though, Jan Stephen. I mean, which I love that phrase. You're a civilian veteran of war, of the Vietnam War, and you're a peace warrior. You believe in peace, and you promote it every way you can. And in part, it's because you experienced it firsthand.
Exactly. No, Vietnam in that sense was kind of God's way of exposing me to the horrors of war. There must be another way, and so I've kind of devoted my time to that kind of thing. But again, as long as war is with us, we're obviously going to need soldiers.
And this is Jan Stephen's book, A Bloody Tapestry, The American War in Vietnam, from a civilian war veteran's perspective. I read, Jan Stephen, that you said, and I think you say it in the book, that it took you a while to come around to the idea that you were a war veteran, a civilian war veteran, and that for you to be able to say that out loud and understand that you had a story to share and trauma associated with war.
By happenstance, Khartoum was a very hot place to be in terms of, particularly the fall of 1967. So I had a lot of experiences, and it was just part of, you just live with it, as you all, any of you have been to war know kind of thing. And so I went on and became a professional psychologist, was working with veterans. And again, looking back, I had a lot of issues. My wife, now deceased, certainly would tell you that kind of thing. Yeah. And had this experience and trained to be a better psychologist for veterans, and realized, as I describe in my book, listening to a Navy medic describe his time in war, and how for years and years and years he denied that he had been he was worthy of being a civilian war veteran kind of thing, or like a trauma kind of thing. It was sort of beneath it. Only real soldiers could have that kind of thing. It was kind of the mentality. So it's a lot of kind of growing up and growing into the fact that when you're exposed to war, you're exposed to war, period.
Jan Stephen, one thing I'm curious about, why did you never become a priest? What put you off that path? I chuckle only because, in fact, I was turned away. In the Maryknoll training, in the Catholic priest training system, there's a year called the novitiate year. It's sort of between undergraduate and graduate school, and it's a time to really think seriously about, you have the stuff for what you're proposing kind of thing. And at the end of that year, Maryknoll decided I didn't have the right stuff. And so they turned me away kind of thing. And they said, take a couple of years and think about it. They thought of me as being too much of a loner. I was maybe just a little too, you mentioned the beginning, that kind of mentality, you had to have to be a Maryknoll, or I guess maybe I embodied that just a little too much. And yeah. Making everybody look bad. So it just strikes. So how did you decide to go to Vietnam then with IVS?
Well, that's a really good question. So remember I'm a Canadian at that point in time. So I'm seeing the world through Canadian eyes, even though I'd been in the States at that time for 4 years in seminary and then a novitiate kind of thing. And so, but again, when they told me no go, what do I do now? Because the farms in Canada had been sold. I mean, that was my destiny when I grew up. I was born to run the family farms. I mean, we were wealthy farmers. I'd be a millionaire several times over today if I'd stayed that path kind of thing. But anyways, I went the way I went kind of thing. And so I don't know where I was going with that.
Well, you were destined to be a farmer, then you were destined to be a priest, but then your destiny changed and you ended up in Vietnam.
So just to answer the question directly, so since I couldn't join the Peace Corps as a Canadian, because Peace Corps is only for Americans, I looked around for alternatives. And when I saw the brochure for the Peace Corps, it felt like a match in heaven to me, because the Catholic justice, social systems, values, even though we're not a peace church, overlap tremendously with the underlying values in the brethren and whatnot. So to me, it was a very easy transition mentally to the kind of values that IVS was talking about.
I'll ask you what I asked veterans who served in Vietnam. Were you trained for what you encountered when you landed in Vietnam?
My colleagues can also, you can tell from the expressions on their face. No, I think in some ways that's something that may have kind of worked in an odd kind of way for you, but the answer is no. We literally were dumped into Vietnam with no preparation to be in war. I don't know about the other guys in terms of your training. We went through, was it Harper's Ferry you folks went through?
Yes.
Yeah. So I remember at that point, there was very little talk about the war. I mean, as I recall in the training, there's a lot of talk on the work and how to kind of join the culture and be part of the culture and not import our values and all the kind of wonderful kind of stuff. But we had absolutely no preparation for war, and certainly no preparation for war where I was, where it was booming very loud in my ear every night. So it was very traumatic. I think looking back on it all, soldiers at least get desensitized for war. I mean, there's a whole training period to go through because, we're not naturally meant for war. You got to train people to do it kind of thing. And the better trained, the better they are at it. But there's a price you pay for it, as we all know, kind of thing.
Yeah. Jan Stephen, so that's such an interesting point that you were sent to Vietnam, the country, not Vietnam, the war.
That's right.
And you were, it was like, and Dick, you say this so wonderfully in the little thought piece memoir that you sent me, is that the war got in the way of the work. You were there to do development work, and the war kept getting in the way. The war, you got caught up in the war. You didn't go there to, serve in the war.
And I think one more thing, if I could throw in here, when Pete and I and some others went to Vietnam in '63, the war, there were no combat soldiers there. There's an advisory program at that time. And I think volunteers that came later were much more attuned to what was going on, and some came because it was going on, is to sort of get closer to see it. But we were a little bit innocent when we went there, I think in 63.
And William, when did you okay, so you arrived in 63 before most Americans had heard of Vietnam or the war.
Yes, it was summer of 63 when Pete and I and a bunch of other innocent volunteers went over there.
Wow.
And keep in mind, because I was in a seminary environment and I was Canadian, I was not exposed to the war that much. I mean, I knew it was in the news kind of thing, even though it was 66. I mean, you're right, Bill, is given the change, I think, in those years, and particularly the months around the time I was there. But to keep in mind that, yeah, it changed very radically, I think.
Do you remember first arriving, Jan Steven, in Vietnam, and what your impressions were?
Well, my first experience in Vietnam was very, very interesting. I remember stepping through the doors in Tan Son Nhut. You all maybe kind of been there kind of thing. And the first thing that happened to me is this taller than normal Vietnamese man walked up to me and in perfect English said to me, "Remember, a nation at war is a nation of spies." I mean, I still remember him grabbing my arm and walked away. And so it was like welcome to Vietnam kind of thing. And so it was like, it was really, I swear those words probably saved my life given where I ended up kind of thing. But so yeah, that was kind of my introduction to Vietnam. And then Saigon at that time, I mean, my first really dramatic memory is in the IVS house. Some of you guys may remember where it was better than I was. My memory's very foggy at 80, to be honest with you, kind of thing. But my first experience, maybe 4 or 5 UA helicopters, and you all were there, remember the UA helicopter sound, roaring over the IVS compound, literally.
You cut out, Jan Steven. Can you repeat that? You remember hearing the Huey helicopters?
The Huey helicopters, and as they flying very low and very fast at full throttle, and as they went over the IVS compound, we were crowded together in the halls being processed for endless documents and endless papers, it seemed to me, kind of thing. And as they went by, the whole building shook. And that was kind of my, if you will, the introduction to the Huey helicopter that became very much a part of my work later on. Boy, so that was kind of my sort of introduction to kind of the war in Saigon. Other than the fact that it was just the traffic. I mean, the big impression was just the traffic, the crazy traffic kind of thing. And it's so those are just some initial impressions. Other guys will have some as well.
I want to invite everybody here on the Zoom side to raise their hand if they have a question or make a comment. You could raise the Zoom hand. You could turn on your camera and wave your hand like that in front of the camera if you'd like. You could put a comment in the chat, and I would love to get to your questions and comments because we love this kind of interaction. We have Vietnam veteran, Navy Vietnam veteran Don Nemchek has a wonderful question. Don, why don't you ask it?
Yes, I will, Todd. Thank you. Volunteers for the IVS, how did the military men act toward you? Did they resent you at all, or did they feel that having the IVS in the villages helped their mission along?
Good question. How did the military treat you guys?
Let me be first, just because I was there when only advisors were there, and I actually lived with the MACV for about the first 6 months I was there, because the province chief would not allow another civilian to live in the town. I had to live on the MACV compound, and so we got along fine, and they kind of understood what we were doing, different things. And later on, when there was a retired lieutenant from the Army came and became the USAID representative, they allowed me to live with him instead of a military compound. But I think we got along fine, and just had different tasks to do.
How about you later, guys? Dick Berliner.
Well, I think some of the military thought we were kind of crazy to be in Vietnam voluntarily. And in fact,
we thought we were CIA, because why else would we be there?
Right. Vietnam was a draft deferment for many of us who were not conscientious objectors. So it was one of the several choices we had for those of us that that did not choose or want to go in the military and did not want to fight in the war. And I came to Vietnam with a lot of questions and probably a very strong skepticism about whether the U.S. was right to even be there. And so I was a little skittish being around military, but found that was not, I did not need to be. I felt we were accepted. I was going to talk later about at one point when actually I felt my life was saved by the presence of several soldiers.
Wow.
I had one story I was going to, I'll just read this now, that when I got to Vinh Long and we did our language training there, we used to go to bars at night to practice what we learned, right, Willie? No other reason but to go practice.
Just so happened that, yeah.
And sometimes we'd observe American soldiers getting into fights with Vietnamese soldiers. And first, I was, critical of their actions, but then I realized that for many, they were drafted, did not want to be there. That I had no idea what they were experiencing during the day. Whether they were out on patrols or in reconnaissance flights, working behind a desk. No doubt they felt the strain of being in a war zone in a country where the children love you, but most of the population does not, and where the battle lines are not clear.
Yeah.
Getting drunk and fighting was maybe a pretty low risk way to handle those kind of contradictions kind of thing. So, but I did appreciate the struggle that military members had. And the other thing I wanted to mention at some point is that my impression of World War II is that you were sent to Germany or wherever, Europe, and you didn't come back till the war was over. And that's how we fought the war, that it was a do or die situation. Vietnam was entirely different. The 13-month tour of duty, I think, had a strong impact, and it's just my outside observation. It took a month to get to know the place, and some people share this, but when you start getting toward the 11th or 12th or 13th month, you're almost useless as a soldier because you really had a strong impulse to survive.
Yeah,
And so
short time.
I would love to hear from soldiers who are caught up in that, how that affected the war. And it seemed like the kind of commitment was different in Vietnam.
Let's go to Carly. You have your hand up, William. I know that you also had your hand up. Carly, how are you?
I'm okay. I was in the same group with Willie and in 63. And you might imagine that American women were related to much differently by the soldiers than the men. A lot of flirtation, a few times affairs, once in a while, a serious relationship. But at any rate, it was quite different at that time. And my feelings about the American involvement there really evolved over time. I was pretty neutral for quite a while. But by 1967, I really got the picture and understood and came back as an anti-war activist.
Against the war. Carly, how many women were in Vietnam, was part of the IVS?
Of IVS, when I was there, it was only the second year that they had women at all.
Okay.
There were 4 of us in the group of 16 that Willie and I were part of. And there were a couple of other women who had come the year before. And we never expanded the female population of Vietnam very much. I know that our chief of party, Don Luce, he and I had a conversation once where he really didn't know what to do with women. He was an agriculturalist. He had started recruiting or working with the guys who really went out in the jungles and worked with indigenous people. And the women who were coming to do teaching and whatever, their whole expectation needs were totally different. But we have a fair number ultimately of women who came mostly to teach.
Harley, what the heck did your parents have to say when you told them you were going off to Vietnam with IVS?
Well, my father was a very, I think the word might be parochial. He thought there were Americans and everyone else. And he had fought in the Pacific in World War II. He did say to me that, which was true, you really never get away from people. The Asians, I think in general, are very accustomed to living very close together, and that's what they like. I had gone to France my junior year in college. And so from that, he sort of got used to the idea that I was going to go and do whatever I wanted to do. And he was pretty accepting.
Okay. William, you had something to say or a question to ask or a statement to make.
Yes. Before IVS, I was in the Peace Corps in Ethiopia. And I went to IVS because one of my friends from the Peace Corps came to New York and told me about IVS. I never heard of it prior to that time. When I went to the training program, I saw Gary Daves. Gary was also in the Peace Corps with me in the same town in Ethiopia. And Gary got kidnapped and spent 5 years in North Vietnam. I did see Gary sometime in the late 70s. And he told me about the experience and said the thing that really bothered him was two things. One was a lack of food to eat. And the other thing was his eyeglasses got broke. And he got new eyeglasses when he was leaving the country after he got released. And he was angry that they took so long to give him eyeglasses. And he was upset that it was Richard Nixon who got him out of Vietnam.
So who he didn't like, but
I serve in the Mekong Delta in Canto, the same town that Willie Myers was in. And I never met Willie until a couple of years ago at reunion.
That's
I was a teacher.
That's what Pete was too at when he was killed near there.
Okay, and then I was a teacher in the high school and teaching English. I arrived in sometime in October '67. I was 26 years old, and I taught there. But then the war was pretty close to us because every night I could see helicopters flying around, and I could see the red tracer bullets going into the I guess called the jungle or very overgrown area. But then you hear sounds of war, but it was like hearing a fire engine or a police siren. It's out there, but it's not close enough to worry about until Tet. And Tet occurred on January the 31st, Vietnam time. And I was out with John Balaban, who some of you may know, and where he lived. And it was so peaceful. I said to John, I think I'll stay here for 3 years instead of the 2. But then the next morning, I had a big, loud sound on my door. And I went to the door and said, what the hell do you want? And it was the United States Colonel. And he told me to stay inside because the town had been invaded by North Vietnam and the Viet Cong. And I told my 2 housemates. So we decided to take a walk to see this guy who worked with CARE. And I heard this loud explosion. And I arrived about a couple minutes later and I saw the same colonel. He said, I told you to stay inside. And I saw on the ground a boot with the part of a leg inside the boot. That was it. And someone said he got hit by an AK-47 rocket. And so I couldn't teach. My high school was all full of refugees. And some of us volunteered to go to the local hospital where they had American doctors and nurses from the Air Force. So I spent about 6 or 7 weeks working in the operating ward, assisting these doctors. I became what they call someone to scrub the infected area prior to the surgeries. And so I saw everything from brain surgery to amputations to intestinal surgeries. I left Vietnam April 25th, 1968, because IVS had told everyone if you don't leave by April 25th, you must finish your tour of duty. And if you leave before that, you have to pay your own way home. And so I decided I wasn't going to stay because I got shot at twice during
Right.
TED. Because Dave Gilson, who I just met once, was murdered near the end of '67. And I thought the war was hopeless. I remember I wrote letters home. I said I hoped the American people were being told the truth about Vietnam, because I found that American soldiers didn't want to fight. The Vietnamese soldiers didn't want to fight. It only seemed like the only people who wanted to fight were from Korea. And it seemed odd though, but I was very anti-war at that point. I went there, I was neutral and became very anti-war because of what I saw in Vietnam. And I saw the racism too. I mean, I was told privately that I was number 10, which is the worst. I wasn't white, so I was number 10. I went to a place where they had these young kids who were children, had fathers who were white or black. And I was told by the nuns that the half white children would be fine because they had nice hair and nice complexion. But they have black kids, the boys would be on the streets and the girls would be prostitutes.
Right.
So that was my experience there. I came home and my regrets were I was starting to learn the language, and I probably would have learned like other volunteers if I remained for 2 years. And I also regret the fact that I had an experience that I lost in a way, because I spent 2 years in Ethiopia as a Peace Corps volunteer. So I think more of Ethiopia than I think of Vietnam, only because my connection was very personal in Ethiopia. And I might have had that same personal connection with Vietnamese if I had remained for 2 years. I did get letters. Well, I got 8 letters from one person that Willie Myers know, because he asked me about Willie Myers. I never heard of Willie Myers at that time. And he was a person who did errands and stuff for IVS. And he wrote me letters, and he would say, I'm lucky I'm in America, and how he's in Vietnam. He told me that the authorities found a photograph of the two of us, and they took it from him. And he was interrogated by the authorities about his involvement with the Americans in IVS. We had a Jeep attack. It was blown up in front of the IVS house. And at the same time, there were people outside watching television. So we came out to see what was going on. And Roger Hinsey, IVS, would jump into the Land Rover, turn over the engine. And the Vietnamese had a flashlight. He said, no, no, no. And so Roger jumped out, and you could see by the front wheel on the passenger side what looked like a bomb. And a dog walked over to it, and then boom, it exploded. And I had sat in that Land Rover about a half hour before, and would have sat there going home if nothing had happened. We were waiting for Ted Kennedy. We were waiting for Ted Kennedy to come.
William, I'm gonna interrupt you just because I know that Dick had something to say here. Dan Petkunis had a question for you all, and I would like to get to Jill. Dick, what were you gonna say?
Well, there are two different train of thought. Just on that bombing incident, as William was about to say, Senator Kennedy was about to come to that site to talk with IVSers. And one thing that happened with IVS in '67 is that several of the leadership resigned in protest of the war, Willie Myers being one of them. But others emerged as leaders, and IVS continued another 4 years. I was in the Tet Offensive as well, and I realized that my role with IVS had little purpose at that time. I was working with groups trying to do economic development, getting young people involved in the countryside, but I wanted to stay in Vietnam, and then I got a job with a medical relief program, bringing children to this country for medical treatment. And the military, by the way, was extremely helpful. They provided all the transportation for these children and some medical care on flights. But I think what happened with IVS cannot be separated with what happened politically. President Johnson wanted to send Peace Corps to Vietnam, and he was turned down by Congress, fortunately, because it would have been too political and it would have hurt Peace Corps in the rest of the world. So the government went through AID to IVS, expanded the number from 80 to up to almost 200 volunteers, many of which, like myself, didn't really have a lot of skills. We had a lot of opinions. What IVS did for me for the year and a half I worked with it was give me language ability, give me comfort in the country, and give me the skills to then work another year in medical relief and help make a bigger difference in that sense.
I want to ask Jan Steven about what his work in the field. Raymond Voith put this in the chat here, the kind of work you were doing, Jan Steven. And then I also want to ask Jill about her brother. Jan Steven, what kind of work were you doing in Vietnam?
I was part of the agriculturalist team. And so I was sent to up to Kontum to work with the agricultural service in Kontum. And mainly because of a shortage of funding, I ended up working with the Montangards people. And as the war progressed, it became very obvious, particularly since they had free fire zones, so the natives were coming in from the forest, kind of to be safe, kind of thing. And so a lot of my work focused on helping the Montangards, who, I mean, essentially whole areas were raised and villages set up. And we're talking about villages that were built of, timber and tin, and it was very unlike the kind of abode that the people were used to living in. So how to feed these people, how to clothe these people. So that I became very involved with that kind of work. You
got very close to the people then.
I did. Yeah. So close that actually one of the villages that I was working in, that the chief asked me if I wanted to marry his daughter in marriage, kind of thing. Yeah. So I got to know them very well.
Did you ever find out what happened to some of the people you were close to after the fall of Saigon?
Well, the fall of Saigon, like a lot of these guys I'm hearing, Tet was a major change of things. And so the IVS station was overrun in Kontum, Kontum was overrun during the Tet offensive. I wasn't there at the time. I just happened to be in Saigon. Otherwise, it might have been a different story, kind of thing. And so, but because of the people that mentioned the casualties of war, so IVS decided to close down a number of its stations and send people home, the kinds of details that people have been talking about. And so what to do? And so IVS did offer me a station at Bami Tuat. I mean, they offered me to stay if I wanted to, but I decided I was just too tired. I couldn't imagine sort of starting over again. And so ended up working with Catholic Relief Services. So after 68, I switched from being, if you will, a volunteer civilian over there to a contractor facility. A good friend of mine who was in IVS at the time, we were both very close, and it became very clear to him the IVS philosophy just was not working in Vietnam. It doesn't work in a war situation, and so because to answer one of the questions one of the men asked earlier, what was it like working with the military and civilians? I got along fine with the military. I sometimes I needed them for various services. Where I had most difficulty sometimes was the USAID folks who had their own hearts and minds mission, and they wanted me to kind of join them in their services, whereas I kind of want to kind of keep true to IVS philosophy, which can be more independent and do things my way. And so that did cause friction with between me and the civilian authorities in Kontum, and military kind of thing. But again, in the end, it became very clear to me we're ended up working with them anyhow, kind of thing, just to get stuff done, kind of thing. So I think a story that kind of just how we were seen is, I remember driving off Tan Son Nhut Air Force Base one morning, dropped somebody off to go somewhere, had an open Jeep, and it picked up some guy from the middle of the base who's on his way to guard you at the front gate. So to give him a lift. He couldn't believe that I was riding around downtown Saigon in an open Jeep. I mean, to him, it was just beyond comprehension that anybody could do something like that and survive. And that's where he was coming from as a military person. And somebody said earlier, I mean, many people thought we were CIA connected and had actually many connections with the CIA, actually.
Well, that's fatal, isn't it, to a non-governmental organization doing development work in a country, to be compromised in the sense of suspected of being part of
Yeah.
larger U.S. military operation, CIA operation. That put you, I'm imagining, Jill is getting to your brother, that put you all in danger, right?
Yes. What you learn very quickly in a war situation, it's very difficult to be neutral. Everybody's suspicious of you. And yeah. But again, I was able to make that work. But yes, it's difficult.
Jill Hunting, your book, Finding Pete, beautiful book, story about your brother, 9 years older than you are. He was killed in Vietnam, IVS volunteer, in November 1965. You were just 15 years old. This is your book about him. Can I ask you, first of all, why did your brother join the IVS?
Well, Pete's experience was a little different from that of some of the other volunteers. He was recruited out of college. He went to Wesleyan University in Connecticut, and he only made 1A in advanced Chinese. So he nearly flunked out on some other things. But anyway, he loved languages. He wasn't a particularly good student. He wanted to help people, and he really wasn't graduate school material. And IVS was recruiting on the Wesleyan campus. Here we are, Pete's 12, I'm 3. And
This is you right here.
yes.
What a cutie. And so he's the big brother. I mean, he must have been a giant in your eyes.
Oh, yes, he was. And my 2 sisters who are still living. And I adored Pete. And the Vietnamese have a saying, the parents do the best with the oldest and the youngest. And I don't know if it's true, but anyway, but hearing these wonderful stories people are sharing, two things come to mind, and they're we can see them in the life of my brother: risk and language training. And one thing that some people have mentioned without going into detail is that IVSers underwent language training in Vietnamese as soon as they got there.
Yes.
So here's Pete, who has studied Chinese, done well in it in college, loves language, and has studied other languages. He had what's called a soft ear, the ability to pick up languages quickly. And so he loved this. He loved speaking Vietnamese. He picked up Cham, the Cham language, Montangards that he worked with. And at the same time, in the long run, this really put him at risk. Because if you were an American who spoke the Vietnamese language and were riding around, as some people called IVSers, like a loose cannon in the countryside, some people became suspicious. And I'm sure every IVS alum on this call can talk about either a close call or having been assumed to have been with the CIA. So I think, in fact, that contributed to Pete being killed. He drove into an ambush in 1965. The ambush was most likely laid for a convoy that he passed on the road, and 5 minutes later they found his body in the road. I wanted to point out behind me, I have 2 blankets made by Cham weavers. And if any of you who are veterans served near Cam Ranh Bay or around that area, you may have seen these beautiful examples of weaving that the women do. This is one my brother sent me, and this is another one that I bought when I was in Vietnam in 2006.
And I should let people know that Cham people in Vietnam are non-Vietnamese ethnic group who live in Vietnam and have for centuries. They were conquered actually by the Vietnamese, by the Dai Viet, as the Dai Viet marched down the coast of Vietnam. So they're an ethnic minority in Vietnam, and your brother was working very closely with them.
Yes, he worked in a number of Cham villages. And I know you're putting up some pictures. Do you have one of the windmill?
Oh yeah, here we go. Hold on.
All right.
Yeah.
So this was maybe you'd call it a typical IVS project. Pete had a high he had high mechanical aptitude, and he was in Phan Rang, and this was a very parched hamlet where farmers needed water for their crops. And the Office of Rural Affairs had instructions on how to build windmills to bring water into the hamlets, but they kept breaking. The paddles were too small. And so Pete, in the spirit of IVS, said to himself, well, you know, I think I could build a windmill, and I think I could build it with different blades and use native wood, and I think it would work. So he built several of these windmills in Ninh Thuan province. And I guess it was USAID sent a photographer out, and they took a lot of pictures of Pete building this windmill as a young idealistic American helping the people of Vietnam.
So he was idealistic, your brother.
He did refer to him once as idealistic, but I think he was more altruistic. And the distinction that I've read is that an altruist has a concern for the well-being of others.
Yeah.
And an idealist is motivated by values and ideals. And there's a slightly negative connotation that an idealist might be naive. And so Pete was only 24 when he was killed. So I'm sure he had a little bit of both, but I think he really wanted to help. So I think of him more as an altruist. And he was very practical, building things like windmills, smokers that he installed in one little hamlet. The purpose of the smoker was that there were these Vietnamese fishermen. There was no refrigeration, no electricity in the village. So the fishermen were losing a lot of their catch every day. It would just spoil. And so someone came up with the idea that if we could teach them how to smoke the fish, they could preserve their catch. And so I think we have a picture of that too.
Here we go. Here we go. Hold on. Let's see. Let's get at that picture. I think I know which one you're talking about. This one?
Yes, that one. You can't make it out because of the shadow, but it says 1963 on it. So here they are demonstrating a fish smoker in one of the no, I don't think it was a Cham village. It was a fishing village on the coast there.
Okay. Can I ask you, Jill, if you could kind of share the painful memory of your family learning about Pete's death?
Sure. And I just want to say, you can ask me anything. I've lived with this for a long time and wrote a book about it that helped me process so much information. So you can ask me anything, Todd.
Thank you. Well, please do let us know, because your family got a notice similar, I think, to some, to families that of fallen servicemen and women in Vietnam.
Well, we got a phone call. My sister and I were getting ready for high school. I was a sophomore in high school. I had just turned 15, so I was just a little girl, basically. And the phone rang one morning around 7 o'clock, and I answered the phone, and a man asked to speak with my father. So my parents were in their bedroom, probably sleeping. So I called my father, and he motioned to my sister and me to go into my bedroom. And we went in, closed the door, and I could hear him speaking in a very serious tone. And I didn't know what it meant. So I thought perhaps my grandmother had died, or perhaps my sister, who was married and living in St. Louis. It never occurred to me in that instant that it was Pete. And then so he hung up the phone and he went into their bedroom, and then I heard my mother scream. And so that's how we got the news. And it was a long time before Dad came back and told us Pete had been killed. And the first report was that he had driven over a landmine, which was not true. And then we waited all day, and then by this time, the news is on the radio. It's, it was a national news story. So
So this was a national news story when your brother was killed in 1965.
Yes, and I might say even international, because, well, for several reasons. He's young, he's 24, he's an idealistic young man. He's gone to help the Vietnamese, and this is very early in the war. And so Americans are wondering, where is this place? What's going on? Who are the Viet Cong? Why are we there? And now they've killed this young man who's there to help. And so, so yes, it was all over the country. And many people have written to me about that. And in fact, returning IVSrs who had served in Vietnam and were back in the States heard the news. Walter Cronkite reported it on the evening news. But back to your question about my family getting the word, the initial, after the landmine story was revised just a couple of hours later, the report from the Associated Press, Walter Cronkite announced this. The word was that he had been led to his death by 2 Vietnamese friends. Well, what is that about? That sounds like he's with the CIA. Or, what was that? Well, my family didn't talk about it. This was typical of a lot of families at the time. There were certain things you just didn't talk about. You're expected to deal with them and move on and so forth. So plus you add to that my parents were from Connecticut, and in Connecticut, there are a lot of things you just don't talk about. And so I didn't know what happened to Pete. And I could hear whispers, people asking my parents, was he with the CIA? So I wanted to know, because we all felt we were close to Pete, but I felt, I'd say, a special bond with him. We looked the most alike. We were the more pragmatic ones in our family. So this question stayed with me. What happened to Pete? And it was many, many years before I found my way to people who could tell me their part of the story. And before I found the letters that Pete wrote home. He wrote 64 letters home. And one word in one letter led me to the woman that I believe he would have married, a woman in Manhattan. And then I found his college girlfriend who'd saved every note he ever wrote to her, including when he left a note at her dorm. She made copies of everything in her scrapbooks for me. So I wound up with 175 letters from my brother, and he came back to life for me.
Isn't that amazing? What a story. I want to continue to ask you about Pete. Rick Erisman has a question. Rick, if you wouldn't mind, you have a couple wonderful questions that you put here in the chat. I'd love for you to post to the group. But Jill, you've gotten to something really important about your brother. And it just, as I'm reading your book, I'm reminded at what a divisive time it was in the late 1960s. What a divisive war, polarizing war the Vietnam War was. It divided families, and it clearly divided your family, including your parents, one from the other. Your parents seemed to react differently to Pete's death.
That's right. My father worked for the Federal Aviation Agency, whose very large training facility is Oklahoma City, where we lived at the time. And my father did not support the war. He wasn't a protester, he wasn't an activist, but he just believed it could not turn out well. And my mother took a more conservative line about it. She supported the war. I think she wanted to believe that Pete had not died in vain, that he had gone to serve his country, and that he was a fallen hero.
He was a fallen hero. And so do you suspect that your mom kind of hid his letters so that she could keep up the aura of Pete being a fallen hero and not really dig into the reality of a conflicted young man who was caught up in a terrible war and had mixed feelings about it and all that stuff?
I think so, Todd. And also, in her grief, everything about Pete became hers. And it became her story and her grief.
Right.
So, as a mother myself now, I guess I can understand that to some extent. But she did keep us as a family from coming together, talking about it, processing it. And, you know, decades have passed, and we all understand more now about grief, the grieving process, the importance of open communication. I mean, the fact that you host this wonderful Veterans Breakfast Club and people can come together and talk about their very moving experiences really proves the point that it's so important to be able to talk about these things.
Right. Rick,
Chuck Cable answered my question. I was curious initially, is there an accountability for the number of IVS casualties that were? And is there any recognition? And he says there's an alumni magazine newsletter that addresses that. Thanks, Chuck.
yeah, how many casualties are there from the IVS? 3 killed? Your brother was the first of 3, Jill?
Actually, Todd, I think there were more. And there's an IVS publication that has a list in the back, and it's out of reach right now, so I can't tell you.
Okay.
There were some in Laos as well. But yes, Pete was the first. And in fact, he was the first American with an NGO to be killed in Vietnam.
And thank you for clarifying that. You know, I got a great email from Ann Kelsey today, who served in Vietnam. I love this as a librarian, served in Vietnam as a volunteer librarian. And she did point out that Pete Hunting was not the first American civilian to be killed in Vietnam. There had been a woman killed earlier in the year 1965, but he was the first. He was one of the first, and the first who worked for an NGO.
That's right.
Your kind of hunt for Pete, your search for your brother, who was kind of sounds like he was kind of frozen in time for you in 1965, and as you grew older, you kind of wanted to find out who he was and how he died. It eventually did take you to Vietnam.
Yes, I made 2 trips to Vietnam, and Chuck Cable and I were on the trip in 1991. Our country had not reestablished diplomatic ties with Vietnam, and so we got in some trouble out in the countryside, asking too many questions in a village where Chuck's cook had lived. And so that was very exciting. And then I went back in 2006 with an Army veteran named Chuck Toish, who is building libraries in only southern Vietnam at this point, I believe. And I visited some villages where Pete worked. Yeah, so 2 trips.
I seem to recall that you met some people that remembered Pete.
Yes, I did. It was, if I didn't have pictures to prove that this happened, it would be too miraculous to believe. But in 2006, Chuck took a delegation of 3 Americans, including me, to visit some of the libraries he was building. And one was near Phan Rang. And I said, if we could stop and look for this little village where Pete worked, and there are these Cham women, it would mean so much to me. So I won't go into the whole story. The whole story is in my book, Finding Pete. But I did meet the granddaughter and daughter of a mother and daughter that he knew. And I was in this little hamlet longer than we meant to be, but because we had extra time to kill, I struck up a conversation with this young woman who began to tell me about an American that her mother and grandmother knew before the soldiers came. And that alone would not be enough. But then she said, he had hair. She touched my hair. She said, my mother say he have hair just like yours. And And he did. And then she said, and he used to drive out to this place on his motorcycle. Well, my antenna went up because I knew Pete had a motorcycle. And then she said that he took her mother to sell her chom weavings like these. Oh. And her mother would say to him, "You can't come out here. It's too dangerous." And he would say what Pete said to many people I knew. He said, "It's all right. I'll take you. Come with me." And she sold all her blankets, which were their sole means of support. And so, yeah, she knew my brother. And it was so ironic because my family stopped talking about him. Here was a family halfway around the world who had never stopped talking about him.
Yeah, who remembered him, right?
Yeah.
Amazing. I'm going to share a picture of you here. You are, tell me where you are and what you're doing here.
This is at the end of my book, and so I'm not going to maybe say everything about it for the benefit of anyone who might read it. But this same, I had proposed a sister city between Phan Rang and the town where I was living at the time, Sonoma, California. And so we had met with some provincial officials about that. We headed down the road, and we were in the vicinity of the area where Pete was killed. And this is our interpreter for the group, Song. And he said, well, we'll stop and we'll buy some flowers and incense, and we'll make a ceremony on the side of the road in remembrance of Pete. So that's what we're doing here. And then a young man walked by. Well, I say young, he might have been 40 at the time. He was a little boy when Pete was killed.
Oh.
He knew the story, and he walked me to the very place where it happened. And his parents had said, don't ever play here. It's very dangerous. This is where they killed the American.
Oh, wow. Man, amazing to think about, like that. Your brother's legacy was still alive.
Yes. And again, if I didn't have a photograph, you might not believe it really happened to me.
Yeah. How wonderful. I do want to invite people. There are wonderful comments and questions here in the chat. And again, I want to invite people to raise their hands, ask questions, continue this discussion. I do want to remind people who we are. This is the Veterans Breakfast Club. I'm the executive director, Todd DePastino. We hold these every Monday night. Everybody's invited to join us. You do not have to be a veteran to attend. You could always watch this program will be archived along with our other past programs on our website. You go to events down, and the drop-down menu takes to past live events. You could watch the archive programs here. This program will be added to our website tomorrow morning. I usually add it, and you'll be able to access it then and share it with people who couldn't make it. We publish, I'm a writer like Jill, who, by the way, is a retired wine and food editor and writer from California. So she's an extremely accomplished writer, and I'm a writer also, historian. We publish a quarterly magazine, VBC Magazine, where we take the stories that we hear at our events and we put it in magazine form and send it out to anybody who wants to receive a copy free of charge. We send out almost 9,000 copies to addresses around the country, and then hand distribute another several thousand. So if you would like to receive a copy and you don't, just let me know. You can email me at todd@veteransbreakfastclub.org. That's todd@veteransbreakfastclub.org. Our summer issue should be hitting mailboxes fairly soon. It is at the printer. I know that I'll be paying for the postage, the nonprofit postage, pretty soon, and that means that it'll start going out. This is our issue that's featuring Bob Harbula, one of our vets here who served in the Marine Corps in the Battle of the Chosin Reservoir, and his story is our cover story for this issue. We have a survey. We love to hear what you think about this program, what you think about what we do, how we can improve what we do. This is a 3-question survey, and I've looked this up. It takes almost exactly 150 seconds to fill out the survey. That's 2.5 minutes. And that's the average time it takes. how do you rate the program? What'd you like about it? How can we improve? Those are the only questions. Please do take it if you can. Sean will be sharing the link here in the chat. Here, let's get back to the questions we have. Michael Markhart asks, I'm still not clear, how did Pete die? Jill, would you mind sharing that story again of exactly how he died?
Not at all. He was not led to his death by two Vietnamese friends. He may have picked up two Vietnamese who needed a ride, because he was always giving people rides. He was known for that. And he was on his way to check on a teammate, and he had checked with the sources. I think it might have been the U.S. Operations Mission, and was told that the road was safe to drive. Mind you, if you were tall and blonde and American, no road was necessarily safe for you in November 1965, but he was on his way to check on a teammate, and he passed this convoy. And well, forgive me, I'm gonna tell you something that I hope will not trigger anyone.
Yeah.
But, I believe what happened, as best I can reconstruct it, is the ambush was set and Pete nearly made it through. There was a volley of bullets and only one struck him, and it struck him from behind so that his foot could not push on the accelerator, and his vehicle came to a slow stop, and then he was executed. He was there were, I think, 4 bullets to the head and many more to the body, and his body was found outside of his vehicle on the road.
So he wasn't necessarily the target of this ambush, but he was he happened to be there at the wrong time.
That's right. And somebody said to me, you know, he saved the lives of some people in that convoy.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. Dick Berliner.
Before we end the program, it took me 25 years to go back to Vietnam. I left there with a lot of anger against our government, against the industrial military complex, against Harvard Business School, where I went to school and where McNamara went to school. But I loved the Vietnamese people, and I loved my experience there, which was very different. I lived in Saigon. The war, we were almost bystanders for most of the war. But I do want to encourage people to look at Vietnam again, not as a war, but as a country. 100 million people, over half are young. I've been back 4 times now, and most recently in February. And it's just a beautiful place to visit, and a beautiful spirit. And I said before, they hated Americans. They really do love Americans, especially after the Russians came after the war. They didn't like the Russians, but they love Americans. And I think for veterans, especially who have trouble processing, it'd be a very good experience.
And you know, Dick, that is such a great segue into my announcement that the Veterans Breakfast Club is doing a trip to Vietnam. I've spent many years teaching about the history of Vietnam and the Vietnam War at the college level, and I've led 2 trips to Vietnam, one in 2018 and one in 2020, and we're going again this year. And we're going to go in November and December for 2 weeks. We travel from Hanoi all the way down to the Mekong Delta. Anybody is welcome to join us. Right now, we have 18 people on the trip. Rick Arisman was on our trip in 2018, and I think he would agree that it was a wonderful one. Ida May's husband, Dale, was on it in 2020, and man, it was that. In fact, Dale was my roommate for our trip to Europe, but it's a wonderful trip. Everybody is welcome to join us. Please do. If you're interested in joining us, let me know, and I can send you all the information. Don Nemchek, wonderful question. Why don't you ask Jill?
Jill, with all due respect, was Pete's body ever returned to the family?
Yes, it was flown originally to Saigon and kept in refrigeration, and then he returned in the company of other Americans, and he is buried in Connecticut, in Woodbridge, Connecticut, where he lived as a boy.
Wonderful. Thank you. I want to highlight, I want to say hello to our two senior veterans on the call, Julia Parsons, a 102-year-old Navy wave. She is joining us, as she always does, from her home in Forest Hills here, Pittsburgh. Hello, Julia. I hope you're doing well. How are you, Julia?
I'm just fine, thank you. I hope you had a good vacation.
I did have a good vacation. The Maine coast is absolutely beautiful. Julia, do you have plans for the 4th of July?
No.
Why not?
Nobody asked.
Nobody asked. Well, okay. Well, we'll see what we can do about that. And then we also have Ed Cottrell. I see that Ed has joined us. He's going to be our guest next week. Ed, you are not the oldest veteran on the phone call. Julia Parsons has you beat by a year. Thank you very much, Ed, for joining us tonight. And we look forward to our conversation next week. Let me ask people, happy anniversary, Todd. Thank you very much, Brad. I'm giving my wife the gift of silence tonight, and she's very appreciative. Do we have other questions or comments here from the room? Do we have other IVSrs on who have not identified themselves yet? I know we have a lot of new names of people who I don't recall joining us before.
Billy Lee Langley.
Oh,
Let me see here. Could we unmute Billy Lee? And we have Peter
Yeah.
Royal.
First of all, thanks, Dick Berliner, for letting me know about today. And I really appreciate you. This is exciting in so many ways to hear comments like this. And you're real. That's the part that I've liked. I went in 62 with IVS, and I love Vietnam. I love the Vietnamese people, and I went back in the 80s. So, and I keep in touch with a lot of Vietnamese here in Southern California. We have a large Vietnamese community in Orange County. So.
And it is amazing how the Vietnamese people, when you're traveling to Vietnam, when you're in Vietnam, how they embrace Americans. It's absolutely remarkable, 50 years later after the war, to have such obvious warm feelings toward the Americans. And, when we're there, veterans will sometimes run into veterans from the other side, and they meet and embrace, and they're, brothers in arms in a way. Renee, how are you?
Good, thank you.
Renee, you were a donut dolly in the Vietnam War.
I was, but later on I worked in Thailand with USO and had the opportunity to travel up to Laos several times. Met Edgar Buell and Galen Beery, who had been with IVS and had gone to work for USAID, but they took me out to a village where I met some of the IVSrs there, and I spent a couple of days with them. And you just don't know how much respect I have for the people with IVS who volunteered to go overseas. I tried, but it was too late. Everybody was leaving because of the situations there. But
And when was IVS shut down finally in Vietnam?
Probably, 75. Well, 72 in Vietnam.
Okay, in Vietnam, 72, before the
75 in
pullout.
Laos.
Okay, 75 in Laos.
Right.
Okay.
Mid 80s worldwide. or late
Okay.
80s, I think.
So worldwide, the mid 80s, IVS shut down as an organization.
Right.
Nice.
Okay.
Steve Nichols is on the call. He can tell you exactly.
Hey, WJM Dallas. Old Huey helicopter pilot, how are you doing?
Well, I'm doing pretty good. How are y'all doing?
We're doing fine.
I just wanted to say that in mid '69, one of my missions was I took two IVS persons, I don't know their names, to the Cao Dai Temple at Tay Ninh. And while they were in, I was with my crew, and I wound up meeting a young man, Viet Cong, that was, he was a Buddhist monk, I think. But long and short was, I went back in 2005, and I had a set of guides, and I made sure they took me to the Cao Dai Temple. And it was interesting because we discussed a whole lot of different things with this young man who was my guide. We got there, and they remembered the IVS people that had been there. We talked about that. And I was looking for this young man now, if he was still alive. And he had died 7 months before I got back to Vietnam, and I gave him the picture of the two of us on the front steps of the Cao Dai Temple.
Oh.
And they would not let me leave until they called in all of the people living on the property, which is everything from Catholics to Buddhists to whatever. Every religion seemed to be there. And they had basically a ceremony to take this picture and put it on their altar. My guide, who was a former Vietnamese Marine, said, "I've never seen anything like that." And I said, "Oh, guess what? I'm just an old helicopter pilot in 25th Division, and I haven't either." But it was really interesting because they talked about some of the IVS people with some of the ones I talked to, the older. Of course, the younger ones don't remember, so that's why we're so liked there, I think.
How neat. And, Ann Wheeler, you just outed Steve Nichols and Sally Benson for being shy. They're on the program here. They're both IVSers from the late 60s. And Jill, you'd probably know them, Steve and Sally.
Yes, hello.
Well, I just want to say to Jill, thank you very much for the story. I did not know that story, but I knew something similar to that in other issues. But it really was. And I will say, my one take from that trip to Vietnam, that was my first one going back. By the time I got from Hanoi all the way down to Saigon and finished that 3 weeks I was in the country, I could not go to the battlefields where I went because I was a helicopter pilot. You couldn't get there. Yeah. Long and short was, it's really interesting. Why in the Sam Hep would we ever go and do something where Ho Chi Minh was our friend in World War II and follow the French in anything because they seem to mess it up every time? My personal observation.
Personal observation. Wonderful. Thank you. Hey, and we have Tom Fox, also IVS veteran, 66 to 68. In other words, I think we have a lot more stories in the room than we have time to get to tonight. Peter Royal, you had your hand up, I believe. If you want to say something or ask a question, how are you, Peter?
Fine, thank you very much, and thanks for the invitation. I was just sticking my hand up to identify myself as an IVS volunteer. I was 4 years in Laos from 72 to 76. The last year was under the new regime when, as other people have mentioned, the program in Laos was closed in 75, but two of us stayed on for another year.
Okay.
Under the new regime.
Under the new regime.
That's right.
So
yeah.
Here, this strikes me very much. My understanding, 416 IVS volunteers in Vietnam during the Vietnam War. That's about the size of a good-sized high school class, and it strikes me as kind of a reunion here tonight of people who, if they didn't know each other directly, they knew people who knew people, and they have this unique experience that's, takes place more overseas with this, with this distinct organization. Why have I not heard of IVS before? I mean, I think of myself as an educated guy who knows about the Vietnam War. I didn't know about the role of the International Voluntary Services. Is there a reason why I haven't heard of it?
Well, Quakers are very quiet.
Quakers are quiet. That's it. That's it, Dick. And you went to Earlham College, a Quaker college in Indiana. I think that is part of it. I truly do. And I'm joking a little bit. Yeah, Herbert Hoover, born a Quaker. During the Great Depression as president, he never liked to talk about how much he gave to charity, and that was not a good political move for Hoover, and that was because he came from that Quaker tradition. You don't brag about your generosity. Thank you, Dick. That's a very good point. Yes, Richard Nixon was a Quaker. Greg Yost, we know that. He was from the conservative Quaker tradition. Henry Shepke. Okay, hold on. Okay, Billy, you have something to say?
Billy Lee.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Billy Lee.
Yeah. I was concerned about Nixon with IVS. Sorry, I just jumped into it. I need to be muted. Thank you.
The name Nixon triggered Billy Lee into, okay. Tom.
I went in 66, just coming out of college, and I think a number of us were there already feeling politicized, that the war was going badly and we wanted to do something. And we were opposed to the war as it was being fought. But I think I went initially through a political lens, but as we worked with the people and learned the language, it became very human, and it was less political and much more, we saw the people that we were working with hurting because of the war. And there were a number of times I remember saying that there are only two types of Americans in Vietnam: those that spoke the language, the Vietnamese language, and those that did not. And if you learned to speak the Vietnamese language, you entered more deeply into their lives, into their myths, into their poetry, and into their personal family life. And it really, I think in that sense, became deeply effective for many of us. I ended up actually marrying a Vietnamese, and we've been married now for 53 years. And so we have maintained, or I've maintained deep ties with Vietnam for these many years, and it's been a huge part of my life. And I'm so grateful to IVS and to others on this call who are members of IVS who shared those experiences with me.
I'm grateful to you for joining us, and I'm grateful to all the IVS veterans here for joining us, and to Jill Hunting for sharing the story of her brother. The first person I asked when I learned about IVS, and I did a little reading, I started calling people who had been in the IVS in Vietnam. The first person I asked very sweetly, very politely, kindly, immediately responded, and she said, "Absolutely not. I will not come on your program because you're a veterans organization. There'll be a lot of Vietnam veterans I'm anti-war, and they're going to hate me." And I love them, and I don't want to get in an argument with them, and I don't want to, I don't want them to. And so I know this is a sensitive subject. The Vietnam War is a divisive issue still, and there are people on both sides of the debate still to this day. And I'm just so grateful to the IVS who are willing to come on and talk about it, even though they know that there are some people here who may not agree with their stance on the war. Louis Wolf?
Yes, I was with IVS in Laos from 1964 to 67, and I went in as a conscientious objector. Of course, Willie Myers and all of us still are in touch. We have reunions every year, including this year. We had our reunion of IVSrs. Let me just say that as a footnote, that IVS had programs in a number of other countries than Laos and Vietnam, including in Africa, in Cambodia, for a short time, in Bolivia, and other countries, which I can't list to you now. I can't remember them all. But let me just say, my experience in Laos was not a good one because the CIA presence there was very heavy. People who know about the war in Laos, it was called the secret war, the secret war. It wasn't a secret from the Lao. In fact, the Lao used to point out the CIA people, and then, in fact, they knew their names. How in the world could they know their names, which were top secret? And so the Lao, like in Vietnam, had an underground movement. And today they're in the government in Laos. I would not call them the regime. They are the government, and they're very progressive government. So I will just end by saying that those of us who were in Laos realize that the war, the legacy of the war, the so-called secret war in Laos, is exemplified by the fact that the bombs, the unexploded ordnance, called in Laos UXOs, UXOs, that is still, all this time after the war officially ended in 1975, here we are in 2023, there's still, the unexploded ordnance is still killing people in Laos. Hundreds of people, many of them children, who pick up these brightly colored pieces and they think it's a toy, and then it blows up and either maims them or kills them.
Yes.
That's the legacy of the war in Laos. Thank you.
In Laos and in much of Vietnam also. Don Nemchek, I would love, before we go to Henry Shepke, you sent a chat to me. Would you mind telling the group here what you said?
Certainly I would, Todd. This has been a wonderful program, and it's much better than I thought it was going to be. I was guessing the IVS volunteers were just a bunch of hippie peaceniks that were out on a idealistic mission and clogging up the works in some way, but boy, was I wrong. And I thank the IVS volunteers for being here today.
Maybe Billy Lee was a hippie peacenik. I don't know.
So more a missionary type, they tell me.
I'm just joking. I'm sorry. I sometimes joke too much. Thank you so much. Henry Shepke, I want everybody to know that Henry Shepke is on. Oh, Bob Flage. Bob, before we get to Henry, Bob Flage, unmute yourself, Bob.
Okay. This has been a remarkable program. As a military person, I was not aware. We were too busy doing our thing. But I will say the speaking about language compatibility, I spoke French, and that helped me tremendously when we were dealing with families, not necessarily families, but adults in villages. Some of the platoon leader wanted me to be an interpreter for them, but it was more of a personal level that I could deal with these people to see that I wasn't an ogre or whatever, and we got some benefits from that. I had people cooking for me. We'd give them NPCs, and they'd cook a chicken or two for us. So being able to relate to them in a language, because in '65 the French influence wasn't gone. I've got good friends that own Vietnamese restaurants now, and all of their offspring, they don't speak French, so there's that's lost. But anyway, the language has a big bearing on dealing with people.
Yep. Language, a bearer of culture. And if you don't speak the language, you don't get access to the culture. Tom, how are you?
Yeah, thank you very much. Such a privilege to be able to hear these wonderful people and their stories and so forth. I was with the Maryknoll Seminary for 3 years, and I want to thank Ray Voith for letting me know about this evening's program. I joined the Navy in '61 when I graduated from college, and became a Navy frogman with the underwater demolition team, and served in Vietnam from '62 to '64. And my experiences there told me what a terrible way war is to solve problems. So I left the Navy in '65, and then of course these are the Navy SEALs now, and my That's another story. My family's still very involved with Navy Special Operations. But I've been doing peace work for all these 50 plus years and writing a book about it now. Went back to Vietnam in 97 with Peace Trees Vietnam. Dana and Perry and his organization, which is still at work now. We planted 2,000 trees in a former minefield up in Quang Tri province, Dong Ha. And Peace Trees Vietnam is still very active in demining and training people and so forth. So again, thank you so much.
Tom, what's your last name?
Dunne, D-U-N-N-E.
D-U-N-N-E. Okay. I'm gonna try. Please get in contact with me, guys. I mean, Tom, did I tell you that the Maryknoll people were a bunch of badasses? I mean, here he is, a Navy frogman, comes from the Maryknoll Seminary. There's a very close connection, I think, the Maryknoll, the Marines of the Catholic Church. Hey, we are over time. This is so fascinating. I do want to let people know that we have a young man who's been listening this whole time, very engaged, because he's been chatting me here in the chat. Henry Shepke is I think he's 15 years old, lives in Madison, Wisconsin, is in 9th grade. Henry, you're going into 10th grade. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's true. That's correct.
That is correct. He's the youngest person on the program tonight. Most of us are older. That means we have what's called crystallized knowledge. Henry has fluid knowledge. So he is just at it in the text, in the chat. He's 3 steps ahead of all of us in this conversation. Henry, you're taking off for Europe this summer for is it your first trip to Europe?
Yeah, me and my family are going to France and the United Kingdom, and it'll be a lot of fun. We're taking a tour of in Normandy of the D-Day beaches. We're gonna visit the Churchill's War Room and Napoleon's tomb, so it'll be a lot of fun.
Oh, how great. And Henry is a history genius and loves listening to veteran stories and the stories that we share at the Veterans Breakfast Club. Henry, have a wonderful trip. And I just want to thank you again for joining us, because it's one thing for us all to share stories with each other, but I think it's something special for the men and women who are on our program to know that a young person like you is listening and will carry the stories into the future. So thank you, Henry. Your presence here really means a lot to us.
Yeah, thank you.
Hey, I appreciate all of you for joining us tonight. I wish you all a safe and happy and healthy 4th of July tomorrow. Please do stay in touch. You could always, contact us through veteransbreakfastclub.org. I would love to bring you together again and do another program on IVS, because I do know we left a lot of stories on the table here tonight. All right. Good night, everybody. Stay well. Thank you.
Thank you, Todd.